The second I pulled into my driveway, I knew something was wrong. After 3 grueling weeks of high-stakes meetings, negotiating my future as the next CEO of Harley-Davidson, I was looking forward to nothing more than a quiet evening at home. Instead, the first thing I saw wasn't the soft glow of the setting sun or the familiar sight of my pristine 2023 Harley-Davidson Road Glide reflecting in the driveway. No, what caught my attention was a bright orange notice flapping against my garage door, screaming for attention. My stomach twisted as I stepped out of my car. Even before I pulled the paper free, I knew exactly who was behind it. Karen Whitmore. Our HOA president. A woman who ran this neighborhood like her personal kingdom, micromanaging everything from trash can placement to the shade of mulch people used in their flower beds. I had only met her twice, but that was enough to see she thrived on control. I scanned the notice, my grip tightening. Violation, unauthorized vehicle storage. Remove motorcycle within 48 hours or face immediate towing and fines. Motorcycles reduce property values and attract an undesirable element to our community. Beneath that, Karen's perfect, looping signature felt like a personal slap in the face. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. Undesirable element? I glanced at my Harley, its deep blue paint job polished to perfection. I had spent countless weekends detailing it, teaching neighborhood kids about engine maintenance. Old Mr. Thompson from next door often brought his grandson over to admire it. Hell, even some of the neighborhood dads had stopped by to swap stories about their own bikes. Just then, movement in my peripheral vision made me look up. Karen. Dressed in a designer workout outfit, she power-walked past my house like a queen surveying her land, not even bothering to acknowledge me. But she didn't have to. She simply glanced at my bike, tapped her $500 smartwatch, and kept going. The message was crystal clear. I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to call after her. She had no idea who she was dealing with. What she didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that in just a few days, I was about to be announced as the new CEO of Harley-Davidson. I could have told her. Could have watched her face drop as she realized she had just picked a fight with the wrong guy. But something told me to wait. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started snapping pictures. The notice, my bike, my spotless driveway, proof. As I did, I heard a voice from across the street. Shame about the bike. I turned to see Travis Parker, one of Karen's right-hand men on the HOA board. He stood by his lawn, hose in hand, watching me with the kind of smug expression that made my skin crawl. I barely knew the guy, but he always seemed to be lurking whenever Karen was flexing her HOA authority. That's when I noticed his tow truck parked in the driveway. A fresh coat of paint gleamed on the side, Parker's Premium Towing. Something in my gut clicked. This wasn't about property values. It wasn't about community standards. This was a setup. And I was their next target. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I sat in my home office, the glow of my laptop illuminating stacks of printed HOA documents spread across my desk. My gut told me there was something bigger at play, and I wasn't about to sit back and let Karen and her lackey, Travis Parker, push me around. By 3 a.m., fueled by too much coffee and sheer determination, I found what I was looking for. There was no official HOA bylaw banning motorcycles. In fact, the rule Karen had cited in her violation notice didn't exist in any of the original documents. It had been added to the HOA website 3 months ago, right around the same time Travis's tow company was awarded an exclusive contract for vehicle enforcement. Coincidence? Not a chance. The more I dug, the worse it got. Every single tow in the past year had been done by Parker's Premium Towing. The impound fees weren't just high, they were downright criminal. And then there was the money trail. Almost $50,000 in HOA funds had been paid out to Travis's company in just the last few months. I wasn't just dealing with a power-hungry HOA president. This was a racket. I finally crawled into bed just before sunrise, my mind racing with next steps. But I didn't get to act on any of them. Because before I even had the chance, Karen made her next move. A blaring alert from my security camera jolted me awake. I rolled over, grabbing my phone, and my blood ran cold. A tow truck was backing into my driveway. I bolted out of bed, pulling on a hoodie and jeans as I flew down the stairs, but by the time I wrenched the front door open, it was too late. My Harley was already chained up, its kickstand scraping against the pavement as the tow truck pulled away. My car keys were in my hand before I even realized what I was doing. I jumped into my truck, tires screeching as I peeled out of my driveway. I followed the taillights through the neighborhood, but as soon as the truck turned the corner, it disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. My phone buzzed. A text from Karen. HOA regulations, unauthorized vehicles have been removed. Office hours begin at 9 a.m. It wasn't even 6 in the morning. She had planned this, waited until I was asleep and took my bike before the 48-hour deadline even expired. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just an overreach of power. This was theft. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into the HOA office, barely restraining my fury. Karen was already seated behind her oversized desk, her pearl necklace perfectly in place, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. Across the room, Travis Parker lounged in a chair, twirling his tow truck keys like he had just won a game. "Mr. Mitchell," Karen greeted, not even bothering to look up from her computer. "We were expecting you." I stepped forward, slapping my hands on her desk. "Where's my bike?" Karen finally looked up, adjusting her designer glasses as she slid a folder toward me. "All the paperwork is in here. Standard impound procedure." I flipped it open. A rule I had never seen before was highlighted in bright yellow. Article 7, Section 12, no recreational vehicles may be stored in driveways. "This is garbage," I snapped, tossing the folder back at her. That rule was never part of the HOA bylaws. Karen leaned back in her chair, her smug expression never faltering. "Well, it is now." Behind me, Travis chuckled, tapping his fingers against his armrest. "Rules are rules, buddy." I turned to glare at him. "You mean the rules you two made up to line your pockets?" His grin widened. "I don't make the rules. I just enforce them." I clenched my fists, but Karen wasn't done twisting the knife. "Your bike is safe at Parker's impound lot," she said, feigning sympathy. "You'll just need to pay the standard retrieval fee." Travis pulled out a crumpled invoice from his jacket, dropping it onto the desk in front of me. "Towing fee, $500. Impound storage fee, overnight rate $1,500. HOA violation fine, $750. Total due, $2,750. I stared at the paper, heat rising in my chest. "You've got to be kidding me." Karen just smiled. "Payment must be made in cash. Within 24 hours. Otherwise, the bike will be considered abandoned." Travis leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to make it sound threatening. "And after that? It goes to auction." I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the invoice. Karen's smile flickered for just a second. "Photography isn't allowed in the office," she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting rule. Is that written down somewhere too?" She didn't answer. As I turned to leave, I caught something through the glass door. Travis slipping an envelope into Karen's desk drawer. My gut told me I needed to find out what was inside. But first, I needed to get my bike back. And to do that, I had to take Karen and Travis down, permanently. By the time I got back to my house, I had already made up my mind. Karen and Travis had pushed me too far. This wasn't just about my bike anymore, This was about power, greed, and corruption, and I was going to expose every last bit of it. I grabbed a notepad, flipping through the pages of notes I had taken the night before, my brain moving faster than my hands. Karen and Travis weren't just enforcing HOA policies, they were weaponizing them. They were using fake rules, illegal fines, and predatory towing to bleed homeowners dry. And then, the realization hit me. This wasn't just happening to me. The Walkers, the Harrisons, the Carters, families who had been forced out of their homes after losing their vehicles. The pattern was right there. Karen would slap them with violations, rack up fines, tow their vehicles, and then pressure them into selling their homes below market value. I needed proof. Real, undeniable evidence. And I knew just where to get it. By noon, I was at the county clerk's office, leaning over the desk of my longtime friend, Emily Brooks. She raised an eyebrow as I dropped a thick folder onto her desk. "Let me guess," she said, flipping it open. "HOA drama?" I exhaled sharply. "More like organized crime. I need to see any property sales linked to Karen Whitmore or Travis Parker." Emily's fingers flew across her keyboard, her face tightening as the data popped up. "Oh, wow." I leaned in. 6 houses had been sold within the past year at well below market price. 3 of those properties were bought under LLCs owned by Karen's husband. The HOA had paid over $200,000 to Travis's towing company for neighborhood vehicle enforcement. A sickening feeling settled in my gut. This was a full-scale extortion racket. Then, Emily clicked on another file. "And look at this, **** Karen just pushed through a new HOA community security fee." I scanned the document, my pulse hammering. It was a fraudulent fee being charged to every homeowner, just high enough that people would grumble but not high enough for them to fight it, and the total amount collected? It was the exact amount that Travis's towing company had been charging the HOA. Karen wasn't just running an illegal towing scam, she was laundering HOA funds through a shell company. I closed my eyes for a second, then exhaled slowly. This was the smoking gun. That night, I sent anonymized messages to every homeowner who had ever had a vehicle towed. Within hours, my phone was blowing up with stories. A dad who had his work van taken in the middle of the night. A single mother whose car was towed while she was inside putting her kids to bed. An elderly veteran who had his restored Mustang stolen right out of his driveway, ***. And then, the final piece. A text from an unknown number. "Auction moved up. Tomorrow, 9:00 a.m. ***. They were trying to sell my bike before I could stop them. I looked at the time. Midnight, that gave me exactly 9 hours. I picked up my phone and made one final call. To Ray Martinez, the president of the State Motorcycle Rights Association. "Ray," I said, voice sharp with urgency. "I need a favor." By sunrise, the quiet suburban streets of my neighborhood were filled with the low, rolling rumble of hundreds of motorcycles. I stepped outside to the sight of riders pulling in one after another, veterans, club members, motorcycle safety advocates, even weekend hobbyists who had heard about what was happening. They filled the cul-de-sac, their polished chrome gleaming in the morning light. Across the street, Karen burst out of her house in a pink silk bathrobe, holding her phone in a death grip. Her hair was still in curlers, her expression a mix of confusion and fury. Then, she spotted me. Her lips curled back in a snarl as she furiously dialed her phone. I didn't need to hear her words to know she was calling Travis. But Travis was already dealing with his own problem. A news van had just pulled up in front of Parker's Premium Towing. I could see him in the distance, yelling into his phone as a reporter tried to question him about illegal impound practices. I walked over to Karen, my hands in my pockets, calm and collected. "Beautiful morning for a community gathering," I said, handing her a thick envelope. She snatched it out of my hand, flipping it open. Her face went pale. Inside was a cease and desist order from my legal team, copies of every fraudulent transaction I had uncovered, and financial records proving the HOA's illegal kickbacks to Parker's Towing. "You can't do this," she hissed. "This is harassment. This is illegal." Behind me, Mrs. Thompson, the sweet old lady from down the block, walked up with a tray of cookies. "Actually, Karen," she said, smiling sweetly, "we checked the bylaws. There's nothing against organized community events." Karen's hands shook as she looked around. More neighbors were stepping outside, some carrying signs, others just watching as the news crews started broadcasting live. And then, just as I predicted, Karen made her biggest mistake yet. She turned to a cop who had arrived on scene, her voice shrill and desperate. "Officer, arrest them. This is a disturbance." The officer, Officer Rivera ***, raised an eyebrow and folded his arms. "We're not arresting anyone, ma'am," he said. "But we are very interested in these HOA financial documents." Karen opened her mouth, then froze. Because just beyond Rivera, a second car was pulling up. A woman in a dark suit stepped out, holding a briefcase. I recognized her immediately. A forensic accountant from the district attorney's office. I turned back to Karen, watching the panic spread across her face as the reality of the situation finally settled in. Her kingdom was collapsing. And it was only the beginning. Karen's hand trembled as she clutched the cease and desist letter, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the paper. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. For the first time since I had moved into this neighborhood, Karen Whitmore looked powerless. The forensic accountant from the district attorney's office adjusted the strap on her briefcase and nodded at the officer beside her. "We're here to conduct an official financial investigation into the HOA's records," she announced. "There have been allegations of embezzlement, fraud, and illegal towing practices." Karen's face drained of color. She turned, searching for Travis Parker, but he was nowhere to be found. A second news van had arrived, and the cameras were now rolling as the forensic accountant and the officers walked straight into the HOA office. I stayed where I was, watching the chaos unfold. Neighbors were gathering, whispering to one another, pointing at Karen. Some were angry, others in shock, but all of them were finally seeing what had been happening in plain sight. Karen gritted her teeth and spun to face me, her voice a venomous whisper. "You have no idea what you've just done." I smiled. "I think I have a pretty good idea." Before she could respond, a loud horn blast shattered the tense silence. A tow truck rumbled onto the street, one of Travis Parker's. But Travis wasn't driving. Instead, the driver's door swung open, and out stepped Danny Cooper, the young guy who worked at Parker's impound lot. He looked nervous but determined as he held up a stack of papers. "I need to report something," he called out. His voice wavered, but he stood his ground. I work for Parker's Towing. And I have proof that the HOA has been illegally auctioning off vehicles." Karen's head snapped toward him. "Danny, shut your mouth," she spat. But it was too late. The reporters swarmed him. Danny handed the stack of documents to the lead investigator, his voice steadier now. "They've been forging auction notices, selling cars before the legal waiting period, and pocketing the profits. Parker's Towing got a cut, but the rest?" It all went to Karen. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Neighbors who had lost cars pushed forward, demanding answers. Officer Rivera cleared his throat. "Ms. Whitmore, based on the evidence provided, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning." Karen took a step back, shaking her head violently. No, this is a mistake. I was only enforcing the rules." "The rules you made up?" I asked, crossing my arms. "I was protecting this neighborhood," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "People like you, biker trash, don't belong here. I was maintaining standards. Silence. Then, Mrs. Thompson, the sweet old woman who had once baked cookies for Karen, shook her head in disgust. You weren't protecting us, she said, her voice heavy with betrayal. You were robbing us. Karen's lips trembled. For a moment, she looked around desperately, hoping for someone, anyone, to come to her defense. No one did. Then, a third police car pulled up. And out stepped two state investigators. Ms. Whitmore, one of them said, flipping open a warrant. We have a court order to seize HOA financial records and freeze all accounts pending investigation. Karen screamed in rage. Travis Parker, who had been trying to quietly slip away, suddenly bolted for his truck. But he didn't get far. Two officers were already blocking his path, and before he could even reach for the door handle, they had him face down on the hood, cuffing him. Karen stumbled back onto the sidewalk, shaking her head in disbelief. This isn't happening, she whispered. This can't be happening. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You know what's funny, Karen? I said, watching the officers haul Travis toward the squad car. If you had just left my bike alone, none of this would have come out. Her eyes snapped to mine, filled with pure hatred. I'll ruin you for this, she hissed. I laughed. Karen, you already ruined yourself. As she was escorted to the police car, I turned back toward the crowd of neighbors. The tension that had hung over this community for so long was finally breaking. People were talking, shaking hands, hugging, finally seeing the truth. And then, as if on cue, the low rumble of hundreds of motorcycles filled the air. The riders who had come for the rally were still lined up down the street, their engines thrumming like a battle drum. It was a sight Karen had once feared. Now, it was the last thing she saw before she was driven away in the back of a police car. Justice had been served. The neighborhood felt different after Karen was gone. Lighter. Like a storm had finally passed, and for the first time in years, people could actually breathe. The HOA board held an emergency vote to remove her and Travis officially, and within a week, their names were scrubbed from every official document. The bank accounts tied to their scam were frozen, and the stolen money was being traced by forensic accountants. Their assets, Karen's oversized house, Travis's fleet of tow trucks, were being seized as part of the legal proceedings. The very system they had used to prey on others was now closing in on them. But the impact of what happened here didn't just stay within our neighborhood. The story had gone viral. News stations ran exposés on HOA corruption, state officials began re-examining towing laws, and homeowners from across the country started coming forward with similar stories. Within weeks, the HOA corruption hotline I had helped set up through Harley-Davidson's legal team was flooded with complaints from people who had been victims of the same predatory tactics. Then, a few months later, something unexpected happened. I got an email from a retirement community in Florida. Their HOA president had started enforcing suspiciously strict rules, residents were being fined for minor infractions, their vehicles towed at alarming rates. Attached to the email was a picture. Karen Whitmore. She had resurfaced, trying to start over in a new town with the same scam. But this time, she had picked the wrong community. One of the residents, a retired judge, had recognized her from our viral news coverage and immediately reported her. Within days, the Florida HOA was investigating her, and by the end of the month, she was once again at the center of a legal battle. Back home, our neighborhood was thriving. Without Karen's suffocating rules, people started actually talking to each other, helping each other. The community center, once a place for Karen's HOA lectures, was now hosting motorcycle safety workshops, DIY home repair classes, and even a scholarship fund for young mechanics. It wasn't just about undoing what Karen had done, it was about building something better. As I stood outside my house, watching the sunset reflect off my shiny, perfectly legal Harley-Davidson, I thought about how much had changed. It had all started with one wrongful tow, one small act of greed that unraveled an entire web of corruption. Have you ever felt powerless against an HOA or a Karen in your neighborhood? Share your experiences below. Let's see who had it worse.